This is a guest essay by Bob Goldberg, who writes the newsletter, The New Zionist Times.
On June 2nd, 2026, Dr. Adam Hamawi won the Democratic Party's primary in New Jersey's 12th congressional district, defeating 12 other candidates with about 27% of the vote. In a district where Democrats hold a voter registration advantage of more than 2 to 1, he is now the prohibitive favorite in November's election. It was not an isolated event. It was the opening chord of a coordinated campaign, one with a digital nervous system, a venture capital funding model, and a candidate pipeline engineered not merely to shift U.S. policy on Israel, but to make anti-Semitism an organizing principle of the modern-day Democratic Party. 3 weeks later, New York's primaries earlier this week confirmed the sweep. Brad Lander toppled incumbent Dan Goldman in New York's 10th congressional district. Daria Liza Avila Chevalier, co-founder of the Columbia University Apartheid Divest Coalition, ousted five-term incumbent Adriano Espaillat in New York's 13th congressional district. Claire Valdez won New York's 7th congressional district with more than 56%. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani had endorsed all three. All three won. In New Jersey's 11th congressional district, Ana Lilia Mejia, who declared Israel's actions genocide within 30 days of October 7th, defeated Tom Malinowski despite heavy pro-Israel spending. These candidates did not simply share a policy position. They shared a machine, one that converts anti-Semitism from a social pathology into an electoral asset. Much of the attention has focused on American priorities and American pro-Palestine super-political action committees, the independent expenditure group that spent $2 million backing Lander, Chevalier, and Valdez in New York alone. But the super PAC is only the most visible component of a far larger apparatus. At the center of that apparatus are the same individuals who built and fund Tech for Palestine. American Priorities was seeded with money from T4P board member Amir Nathu and former Eplovin executives, whose capital traces back to a Chinese state-connected private equity firm that the U.S. government blocked on national security grounds. The same core donors, Hassan and Ahmed, first funded New Yorkers for lower costs. The super PAC that made Mamdani's mayoral campaign viable, establishing the investment sequence clearly. Fund Mamdani, prove the model, scale nationally. Meanwhile, Sam Marouk, a Texas businessman giving $100,000 to American Priorities, simultaneously donated to Anti-Zionist America, PAC and Citizens Against AIPAC Corruption, revealing that American Priorities is not a standalone operation, but the anchor of an interlocking anti-Israel donor network. A new policy political action committee, founded by two former Joe Biden administration officials who resigned over U.S. support for Israel, runs parallel operations, micro-targeting Dearborn, Michigan, to build a lobbying force against AIPAC, while American Priorities operates in formal partnership with Justice Democrats and Vice Chairman of the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg's Leaders We Deserve, with 8-figure spending planned across at least 12 House of Representatives races. The organizational web is equally dense. The Democratic Socialists of America formally endorsed Chevalier and Valdez. Chevalier co-founded Columbia University Apartheid Divest, the Columbia University Encampment Coalition that exemplified precisely the kind of campus digital occupation T4P's tools were engineered to enable. Lander personally campaigned for Mejia. Both received J Street political cover while benefiting from the same dark money pipeline. The candidates are different. The machine behind them is the same. This is the first fully operational anti-Semitic political machine in American history. Not smoke-filled rooms and ward bosses, but servers, algorithms, encrypted apps, and venture capital, all coordinated through a network of individuals who share a board seat, a donor list, a vocabulary engine, and a single goal: to make opposition to Jewish statehood the defining litmus test of the Democratic Party. The old Tammany Hall ran on patronage and fear. This machine runs on code. The loyalty oath has been replaced by a vocabulary test enforced by artificial intelligence, vocabulary that denies Jewish peoplehood, delegitimizes the Jewish state, and weaponizes the language of civil rights to make Jew hatred respectable. In 2016, Chinese private equity firm Orient Hantai Capital, a subsidiary of state-connected Orient Securities, agreed to acquire a majority stake in Palo Alto-based AppLovin for $1.4 billion. The deal never closed. The U.S. government's Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States killed it on national security grounds, citing concerns about Chinese state-linked ownership of AppLovin's vast trove of American user data and Hantai's ties to a state-connected financial institution. The acquisition was restructured. Orient Hantai retained a 9.98% equity stake and converted the remainder into $841 million in debt financing, capital that remained inside the AppLovin ecosystem as the company's valuation exploded. The parent company, Orient Group, is now under active investigation by China's securities regulator for 4 consecutive years of serious financial fraud and faces mandatory delisting. That is the financial origin of American priorities. Capital that the U.S. government deemed a national security threat when it tried to buy a controlling stake in an American tech company has since been recycled through AppLovin executives, a T4P board member, and a syndicate model super PAC into congressional seats in New York and New Jersey. The currency being spent was flagged by the U.S. government. It was spent anyway. If American priorities is the machine's treasury, T4P is its engine room, and the engine runs on antisemitism. T4P's resistance tech stack, over 90 technical projects, bypasses American technological controls, isolates Israel economically and politically, and builds a sovereign information ecosystem in which the delegitimization of Jewish civilization is the default, unquestioned premise. The old machines sought power. This one seeks the destruction of Jewish statehood. Upscrolled is T4P's media arm, built specifically to host what mainstream platforms prohibit. It carries Hamas and Hezbollah content without moderation, erased Israel from its location menu, and labels content moderation Zionist censorship. Dropsite News and Mondoweiss migrated here to reach millions of young Americans unfiltered. Adam Hamawi's campaign narrative entered this pipeline and reached a radicalized base no legacy outlet could deliver. The machine creates an information environment in which Jews have no legitimate national home and no legitimate right to self-defense before a voter ever sees a ballot. Thora AI, Thora means revolution in Arabic, manufactures message discipline at scale. Built by Syrian engineers within the T4P network, it distills legal briefs and academic texts into standardized rhetoric. Settler colonialism, apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing. This is not a policy vocabulary. It systematically denies Jewish historical connection to the land of Israel and equates the Jewish state with history's worst crimes. Mejia adopted the genocide framing within 30 days of October 7th, while Israelis were still identifying their dead. Hamawi built his campaign around it. Daria Liza Avila Chevalier's deleted posts denied Israel's right to exist. Claire Valdez named genocide before naming a single policy alternative. The machine does not wait for politicians to find the right words. It gives them the words, tests the words, and elects the politicians who use them. When AI automates anti-Semitic consensus, it stops being a fringe position and starts becoming the price of admission to a major American political party. The software Boycat embeds economic warfare into the grocery run. Scan a barcode, instantly know whether a product is tied to a BDS target. The BDS movement's stated goal is not a two-state solution. It is the elimination of Israel as a Jewish state. With 500,000 active users, Boycat has turned that goal into a consumer routine. The website Find a Protest mobilizes bodies on demand, processing activist schedules into a single interactive map, drawing 500,000 weekly visits, enabling flash mobs at supply hubs, ports of entry, or synagogues within hours. The inclusion of synagogues is not an accident, it is a feature. Chevalier attended the October 8th Times Square rally, organized by Al Auda New York, a Find a Protest partner. One day after Hamas murdered 1,200 Israelis, the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. She defended her attendance. The machine brought her to that rally. The machine later brought her to U.S. Congress. The website News Cord manages the press algorithmically, monitoring journalism for pro-Israel framing, then automatically firing targeted messages surpassing 40,000 communications per campaign at editors and newsrooms. This is not media criticism. It is the systematic intimidation of any voice that refuses to adopt the machine's premise that Israel has no right to exist, its defense is a crime, and people who support the Jewish state are complicit in genocide. Entrepreneurs for Palestine is the machine's suit and tie division, and its most dangerous innovation is making anti-Semitism respectable in the corporate world. With over 270 founders, venture capitalists, and CEOs across 44 countries, Entrepreneurs for Palestine's strategic decoupling pledge asks tech leaders to purge Israeli-linked cybersecurity, cloud, and analytics vendors. It routes capital toward investors feeding the same financial networks as American priorities. It works with hiring engines, like the organization Apricot, which claims it, quote, connects startups with top talent from the Middle East and North Africa region, including Palestine. Redirect global tech salaries away from Israeli professionals at scale. When a company audits its supply chain for quote-unquote Israeli-linked vendors, it is not engaging in policy debate. It is practicing economic discrimination against Jews on the basis of national origin. Entrepreneurs for Palestine has given that discrimination a PowerPoint, a pledge form, and a LinkedIn post. It has laundered Jew hatred through the language of the corporate framework ESG, environmental, social, and governance. This machine does not merely elect anti-Semitic politicians. It restructures the economy around anti-Semitism, controls information to normalize it, redirects capital to fund it, and shapes the next generation's vocabulary so that anti-Semitism arrives pre-installed before they ever vote. Adam Hamawi, Brad Lander, Daria-Liza Avila Chevalier, Claire Valdez, and Ana Lilia Mejia are the machine's output, identified, funded, messaged, mobilized, and elected through a system no single political action committee or protest organization could have produced alone. Lander completed the machine's most important task. It turned a Jewish politician into a vector for the delegitimization of the Jewish state. His transformation from opposing BDS in 2016 to pledging to vote against arms to Israel in 2026 is not political evolution. It is a case study in what this machine does to those who need its support to survive. He won. Zohran Mamdani now governs New York City on the machine's terms. In his first week in office this past January, he revoked the world-renowned International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's anti-Semitism definition and restored the right of city agencies to participate in BDS. The largest Jewish city outside Israel is now led by a man who refuses to recognize the standard definition of Jew hatred. The T4P network has backed over 20 candidates this cycle. Between 125 and 135 anti-Israel elected officials are now documented across federal, state, and local levels. NGOs like Teach for Palestine distribute curricula replacing standard history with so-called apartheid and Nakba frameworks, pre-installing the machine's conclusions in young voters before they ever enter a polling booth. The Democratic Party was once the political home of many American Jews. That party is being systematically captured. The machine is not merely changing the Democratic Party's policy on Israel. It is remaking the party's moral architecture, replacing the prohibition on ethnic hatred with the requirement of it, so long as the target is Jews and the Jewish state.